one of the things that is interesting to see is that this is a very comprehensive video that you watched. Also, must apologize, my voice is not helping me today. It's my third lecture today, so I'm going down with it. So initially I was told that I will do a formal presentation, and I told the organizers, because I had seen the video before, that it would be more important that I speak very briefly, maybe not even 5 minutes, and then have a dialogue amongst you guys where I will be the facilitator, because I don't see any merit in repeating what you've just seen. But there are a few things that I would like to highlight. Imagine a place with population as big as Toronto and a very large footprint, physical footprint for about 8 million people. Imagine a place that has remained underdeveloped over the past not just 6 decades, but a few hundred years. Imagine the place that is very hostile to human living. You can't eat coal, regardless of how much it resides underneath your feet. You can't drink oil, regardless of how many million barrels of oil resides underneath your feet. It's a very, very difficult terrain to live in. So one wonders why there has not been a population growth in Balochistan over the years. And if you look at the topography, the geology of the place, you realize that it's a place that may never have a kind of growth, population growth that you see in mostly fertile areas, such as the ones in Indian and Pakistani Punjab and parts of Sindh, which are very fertile. And while you're looking at a small population size, 6 to 8 million people, sitting on a very large landmass, you look at a political question, a question of self-determination, and then you ask yourself, is everybody a Baloch in Balochistan? And then you run into another major concern that would further complicate the ultimate settlement of this issue, when you realize that Baloch may not be in majority, and if they are, in a very thin majority in Balochistan. About 50 to 55% of the population in Balochistan are ethnic Baloch. The rest are Pashtuns, Hazaras, and others. And within the Baloch tribes, not all Baloch speak the same language or come from the same cultural heritage. Main divides are Barohis, people who speak Brahavi, and people who speak Balochi, 2 different languages, which have coexisted peacefully for the last many years, hundreds of years. When you look at the demographic divide, the cultural divide, you also look at the spatial underpinnings of those divides. It turns out that most Pashtuns live in the north of Balochistan, in areas bordering the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, where the districts, or the politically or administrative boundaries called districts, such as the census metropolitan areas in Canada, over there 90% of the population is Pashtun or others. Further complicates the problem is the fact that the human capital amongst the ethnic Balochs is very poor. According to the Human Development Index for Pakistan, the worst in human capital in Pakistan are the districts in Balochistan. These are the people who are struggling, not just for their political rights, but also struggling to live alive, to live, walking miles to get water, and with very limited resources that would substantiate or sustain living. Lastly, given the poor human capital, you would notice that Balochistan does not have enough doctors and engineers or university professors or the civil service to be able to run themselves independently. And then, while Balochs are the victims, as you could see in this movie, there are other victims in Balochistan as well. The Hazara tribe that lives along the border and also in the city of Quetta, who are ethnic Hazaras and religiously Shias, are routinely killed, taken off from buses and shot in cold blood. The vice-chancellor, the pro-vice-chancellor of the University of Balochistan, a Punjabi, was killed outside his home. And other non-ethnic Balochs are killed routinely in Balochistan. And in most instances, it's either the sectarian parties, banned groups like Lashkar-e-Jhangvi and others, or those Sunni-based opposition groups from Iran, such as Jandallah, who have now sided or joined hands, if not joined hands, are protected by, and if are not protected by, operate from the same basis as the Baloch rebellious tribes are working. And I apologize for using the rebellion tribes. The Baloch tribes are working. It's their land. And they have the right to decide what goes on in their land. It's not my land. It's the land of the Balochs. So my apology, that was a slip of tongue. The other key factor that I'm concerned with about Balochistan is that the economic apartheid of Balochs at the hand of non-Balochs continues. And it has continued over the past 6 or 7 decades. So, to give you an example, the natural gas that heats up all the homes and provides fuel for cooking in Pakistan comes from a place called Sui in Balochistan. And the natural gas in Pakistan is known as Sui gas. And my family in Peshawar, my extended family in Lahore, and my other family in Rawalpindi got access to Sui gas decades before Balochs had access to Sui gas. It came from their land, but they did not have access to it. You saw Gwadar Port, which is located in Balochistan, and it has a sort of a murky issue related to its ownership. It was given up by one of the Baloch kings or sardars to a neighboring Arab state, and then it was bought later by the government of Pakistan at a cost of a few $1 million. So it becomes very difficult to ascertain who is the owner, because it was only in the 60s when the government of Pakistan, the federal government, paid and bought the land back. At the end of the day, the Baloch tribes have been living there. And in an article that I wrote for Dawn, I looked at the development agency, the home building companies that have registered themselves and have been awarded development rights for residential neighborhoods in the city of Gwadar. And I found out that most were based in Lahore or Karachi, and hardly any in Gwadar. So right then and there you see that the economic discrimination of Balochs continues. In March last year, I was in Pakistan, and I was at the Sustainable Development Policy Institute for a seminar. As I stepped out from the seminar, a big guy, 6 foot tall, bulky guy, came up and he said that you guys speak about a lot of things in all these think tanks. You never discuss Balochs in Punjab. He said, well, our people are being abducted by security agencies, security apparatus, without due cause and killed later. You don't talk about it. Well, I can certainly say that Baloch's resentment, Baloch's deprivation, Baloch's economic conditions, and the injustices that have been going on against them have taken the front pages, have shown up on the front pages of newspapers and television channels all over Pakistan. In fact, the newspaper that I write for, Dawn, has a permanent section on its front page, on its website, about Balochistan. The reality of Balochistan, and that's where I end, is that unless Pakistan's military decides that it's no longer going to be involved in what it is involved in, the civil structure is too weak to resist it. The Chief Secretary of Balochistan is on record saying that there's nothing we can do against the Frontier Constabulary, FC as they call it. They pick up people, they abduct them, they kidnap them, there's nothing we can do. So the writ, the administrators, the local political administrators or the local civil authorities have no control over Balochistan, which is effectively under the control of the military through its agencies such as Frontier Constabulary and others. My personal view is as follows. We have to learn to respect the rights of people, their territorial rights, their cultural rights, their linguistic rights, their economic rights, their ecological rights. And it is my understanding that that realization has not yet taken place with the Pakistan's establishment vis-a-vis Balochistan. Pashtuns do not want to secede from Pakistan. And the Pashtuns at this stage, led by their political leadership, Mahmud Khan Achakzai, have no interest in a separate independent Balochistan. They see themselves as part of Pakistan. And that's where I'm really afraid that if this thing continues, then after, even if the military leaves, they may start a war between the Balochs and the Pashtuns. And I hope that that will never happen and that the people are able to reconcile, even though a tremendous amount of blood has already spilled. Balochs have been reluctant to be part of Pakistan. That is true because they were sort of annexed without their will. It was the Kalat state, and the Khan of Kalat had sort of dominion over the area. And Pakistan, when it was created, just took over. So there was no real dialogue with the people of Balochistan as to, would you like to join Pakistan? Would you like to be independent? Maybe they want to join Afghanistan, Iran. So that sort of self-determination did not happen for Baloch. And while I say that, I'm also mindful of the fact that not all Baloch tribes would like to secede from Pakistan. There are several tribes bordering the Sindh province who would like to, who see themselves as part of Pakistan. So it's not as cut and dry as you say, Baloch want to be independent. But it doesn't really matter. There's great injustice taking place against the Balochs. One of the things that I tried to answer in one of the pieces that I wrote is that often Baloch Sardars are accused of keeping their people, the Baloch people, backward and lacking development. They say, Baloch apne gaon mein, Sardar apne ilaqe mein school nahi kholne dete. They don't let people to open, the government to open schools. And then what I did is a comparative study of the tribes, Baloch Sardars who are loyal to the government, such as Mirza Farullah Khan Jamali, and the Baloch Sardars and the areas which are not very, they don't fancy the government of Pakistan that much, such as the Bugti tribes. And I demonstrated in a comparative analysis of socio-development that the presence of schools or infant mortality rate or mothers dying during childbirth are statistically not different between the Baloch tribes that are loyal to Pakistan and rather independent-minded Baloch tribes. So the prevalence of schools, prevalence of education, institutions is almost the same. So the entire province has been deprived regardless of the affiliation of the tribes with or without Pakistan, with or against Pakistan. Okay, thank you. Now this is interesting. Okay. Look, I work with 1%. I work actually with one person. If there's one person who has been wronged, we are accountable. And we can do the arithmetic in very different ways and come up with 5%, 10%, 15%. The reality is that Frontier Constabulary is running Balochistan, regardless of 10% Baloch wanting independence or whatnot. And that is not enshrined in the constitution of Pakistan, that the military runs a province or the entire country. So it's a fundamental process of not just Balochs not having rights on their land. It's a fundamental discrimination against the civil system of governance in Pakistan, where the military takes over at its will. And even when it's not there at the forefront, it rules through its puppets. The instrument of accession is a very interesting point you raise. And you have to see how you cannot, the Pakistani establishment cannot say, well, the instrument of accession was signed by the Khan of Qalat, so Balochistan is ours. And then I say the instrument of accession was signed by Maharaja Hari Singh, so Kashmir is India's. Problem solved. The dispute between Pakistan and India over Kashmir is that the Maharaja Hari Singh went with India. He said, I don't trust these guys, so I'm going with India. Even though at that time, after partition, Pakistani government was supplying mail to all of Kashmir. So it was providing the civil services, and it would not have been such a big mess as the grandfathers of these Taliban did not show up in Kashmir with Lashkars. The same Pashtuns showed up, the Waziri tribes, and messed up the whole thing for the last 6 decades. So even if it was signed, and there are different interpretations of that accession, people of Balochistan were not consulted, number one. Number two, the Qalat Khanate, or the Qalat king, did not have control over the entire Balochistan. His control was only to the south of the present Balochistan. So still, if he signed up, he gave up some control over Balochistan, that was not for the north or the center, but only to the place where he had his governance, which was not extended to all of Balochistan. At the end of the day, what matters is what people of Balochistan say today. And the governments right now, for example, in Dera Bukti, you and I cannot go there. The military has cordoned it off. And military plays favorites. It picks one grandson of Sardar Bukti, Akbar Khan, and pitches him against another grandson. And then they keep on fighting in Karachi and kill each other's wives and daughters. Or somebody else is involved in the killings of Barhamdagh Bukti's sister and his niece in Karachi. It becomes a very bloody, messy issue. These are things that people, honorable people, settle honorably by giving respect and admitting guilt. That honor is missing. Oil is very tricky. There's more oil in the United States than there is in Saudi Arabia. That doesn't change a thing. It's how much of that could be explored at an affordable cost. That matters. That matters. There's much more oil under Caspian Sea, but the cost of exploiting that resource is tremendous. And the same lies with Balochistan. When I was a student in Pakistan, we used to read in our books that the province of Balochistan is rich with minerals. And my younger brother, who was 1 year junior, was reading the same book 1 year later. And one day he asked my father, he said, even though the province is rich with minerals, they don't have any water. You can't drink oil. That was my brother, 10 years old, coming to the conclusion. That hasn't changed 30 years later. That richness first feed people. If you cannot grow a crop, you can't till your land, you're water deprived. So who cares if you have coal or oil? And who's going to exploit that resource? There's an agency called the Balochistan Development Agency responsible for making all the economic decisions about Balochistan. And the lack or poor state of human capital is such that last year, the president or the chair of the Balochistan Development Authority extended his own contract for 3 years without consulting anyone. So there's no governance in Balochistan. Sardars get money from governments and they get royalties as well for natural resources exploited on their lands. But it's their land. It has been their land for the last few hundred years. And for some reason, I think the establishment of Pakistan has to come to that conclusion. They inherited it. It's their land. That's how the entire subcontinent was. And we decided not to do land reforms, that is the Pakistanis, and that is the aftermath of that. So land is still owned by Sardars. In fact, they own people as well, living on the land. And these are cultural things. I mean, it may sound alien to some, but cultures don't evolve at the same speed as we would hope to see. The same is the case with the Pakistan's tribal areas. For those of you who have never been to Waziristan or Sadda or Parachanar or Malakand, these are tribal people. They have stuck to their cultures and they are comfortable. And foreign interventions to sort of civilize people in the white man burdens approach of civilizing, taking kids away from their parents, Aboriginal parents, and giving them to churches, that doesn't work. It didn't work here, it wouldn't work in Canada, in Pakistan. Look at the tribal systems that exist right now, starting with Saudi Arabia. And you just said that wherever there is tribal allegiances, there's no development. I think Saudi Arabia is much ahead of Pakistan. UAE, Dubai. I mean, the Khalifa who's running the Emirates is a clan leader, followed by a very small clan. And if I were to buy your argument, then I cannot understand why the Middle East got developed, if tribal allegiances were such a bad thing. But at the same time, development is a very complex thing. Military alone is not responsible for the backwardness of the people of Balochistan. Because there are other backward places in Pakistan where military is not running campaigns against the indigenous. And they are backward as well. There is a sad combination of natural endowments. There's a lack of natural endowments such as water and fertile land that contributes over a very long-term underdevelopment of a people in a place. And if other substitutes are not found, other factors of production are not found at affordable rates and quickly and easily exploitable, then poverty persists in those areas, regardless of a military presence or not, external military presence or not, otherwise. So these are grave challenges.